Hey everyone, Clio here and welcome to my channel, and today I am doing my 5th Booker book talk for the shortlist for the Booker Prize 2019. Today I'm talking about An Orchestra of Minorities by Chigozie Obioma. So we are May 2020 and I'm still on the shortlist for the Booker Prize 2019. But as I've said before, I like to read all of them, but I don't really push them as a priority neither. But I do wish I would have pushed this one a little bit more to the front, because basically all my information about this book came from people talking about their predictions for the Booker Prize for 2019, and this book was always kind of just forgotten, it seemed, or it was always just like, it was mentioned as being on the shortlist, but it never got mentioned in terms of its likelihood for winning the prize. I don't know whether that had to do with the fact that it came out early 2019, and so by the time that the prize came around, it was like it already had been out for such a long time that people just didn't really think too much about it anymore. But I absolutely adored this one. Along with Lanny, this is going to be my favorite for the Booker Prize 2019 so far. So An Orchestra of Minorities is a story in which we are following our main character, Chinonso. Chinonso is a chicken farmer who is living in Nigeria. He has a very small chicken farm at his place, but he is getting by just fine. And one day he stumbles upon a girl who is standing on the edge of a bridge, and it seems like she's about to commit suicide. So he stops and he manages to talk her out of it, and through this sort of event they are tied forever again, and when they meet again they start to form a romantic relationship. However, the problem that exists is that she is coming from a rich family and he is coming from poor backgrounds. He has little education, he never went to university, he has not a lot of money, whereas she is coming from money and has had a good education. She has been studying abroad. So in the eyes of her family, he is not worthy, and they make that abundantly clear. So basically this entire book is about Chinonso trying to prove his worth to Ndali, which is the name of his romantic interest, to Ndali's family. And he constantly throughout his book is getting beaten down emotionally, financially, and also physically at points within this book. And so this book is ultimately about about the transformation that can occur in a character throughout hardships. So Chigozie at the beginning of this book is very happy with his circumstances. You know, I mean, he's maybe not very happy with his circumstances, but he's definitely living a life in contentment. He isn't reaching for anything more. He's happy with the way his life is going, and he is getting by just fine. He's also a little bit on the side, he's also a little bit naive at the beginning of this book when Ndali's parents appear not to really like him. He at first is just like, but they just need to get to know me better, and then afterwards he's like, maybe if I can get an education they will like me, and doesn't seem to understand that they will never like him, no matter how much he will grow as a character, no matter how educated he can get. Her parents are probably never going to like him. They're always going to think he's inferior to their daughter. So throughout we see this transformation that this character is undergoing, because we have to deal with a lot of anxiety and fears that he is going through. You know, he's always anxious when he's around her family, because he wants to prove himself to them, but he doesn't know what to say when he's around them. And then he gets taken down in terms of, like, he's socially taken down all the time. They make him put on a laborer's outfit and like work the parking garage at their party, just to showcase, to really make it clear to him, you are Renita's, this is where you should be, this is your place. And so these sort of circumstances are constantly pushing him more and more into fear, into anxiety, into malcontent, ultimately pushing him into despair, making him take decisions that are rash, decisions that have a huge impact on his life, and that will ultimately also continue to add on to his hardship, to his downfall. And throughout we see more and more how the more he gets to feel despair, the more he is left in these circumstances, he becomes at first depressed. He goes into himself, he doesn't know what to do. He basically would just be sitting around staring at things if it weren't that for the fact that he has these people that come into his life who really feel for him and really guide him along, trying to get his circumstances to improve again. But so he himself is very much detaching himself at times from what is happening in his life, seeing no way out anymore. And then slowly we see that despondency, that despair ultimately lead into anger, into revenge. So the latter part of this book is very much about how he starts to develop certain thought patterns, how he starts to think about other characters' motivations and think about how they have wronged him and how he wants to get back at these characters, and how he can no longer step outside of his anger to see that things might be different than the way that he is interpreting it. You know, he becomes so enwrapped in his anger, in his rage, in his negative feelings, that he no longer sees the other side of the story, and so he becomes very fixated, very much focused on doing harm. So I think that is the overall like the power of this book. It's a very great rendition of how a character can go from contentment into despair and ultimately anger and revenge. So that would be like my main selling point for this book, but this book is doing a lot more than just giving us this story of this individual. It is also placing the story of this individual within a larger whole. The title, An Orchestra of Minorities, refers to a phrase that Chinonso's father would often talk about. So the Orchestra of Minorities refers to the sound that the chickens in his farm make when one of their own gets hurt. And so it's talking about how these chickens who are the prey can do nothing against their predator, who is either the human taking care of them or a animal predator trying to feed itself, and how all they can do is sit around and cry. And so at first, for like the first 2/3 or something of this novel, this Orchestra of Minority definitely refers to Chinonso himself and how he is sucked in more and more into this situation in which all he can do is sit around and cry about what has happened to him. But this whole struggle should be seen in a wider time frame of the struggle of all minorities to all minorities having the struggle of feeling like they are not fully in control of their lives, like there are outside forces that are making it hard for them or making it impossible for them to reach the sort of life that they want to live, to be able to have the sort of life that they should be able to have, the same as other people in this world. And so it is referring to these other minorities as well throughout sometimes. So it's constantly referring to like power outages within the cities. It's referring to the plights of immigrants. So at some point in this story he emigrates to Cyprus, and it's then also showing other Nigerians in Cyprus and the struggles that they are going through and the schemes that they fall victim to. And so these other plights are always more or less in the background or more or less in the details, but it is never just a detail. It's very much part of this world that we are looking at and part of this story that we are looking at. And in the end we also go back to this idea of the minorities as a whole, not just this one story of a person within a minority group who is financially not independent enough to be able to overcome the difficulties that are placed against him. Another interesting aspect of this story is the narrative style. So this story is not told through Chinonso himself as the narrator. The narrator for this story is his chi. So this book is very much rooted in Igbo cosmology. I had never heard of Igbo cosmology, but it sounded very interesting throughout this book. We are also given a chart at the beginning of this book that kind of clarifies the Igbo cosmology for you, and you can refer back to it throughout, but I definitely think I referred back to it a little bit at the beginning when we were going into the book, but definitely throughout it becomes a lot more clear. You become to get a little bit more familiar with this. But so the Chi is basically a sort of guardian spirit. It's a guardian spirit who goes through many reincarnations in its lifetime. So the Chi of Chinonzo has also been around for many eons, many ages, and he is also drawing upon past experiences throughout his narration of this story. So he will also refer to things he saw when his host, for example, was a slave in America, or things that happened to a female that inhabited earlier on. So throughout we are rooting this story in the past of Nigeria as well. And so the Chi is this guardian spirit, but as a guardian spirit he can not really do much. He can guide his host, but he has no power over his host's action. So all he can do is kind of send impulses at his host, but whether this host chooses to act upon them or not is entirely up to the host. So you can think of it as sort of like flashes of ideas that you sometimes get, or flashes of fear of like, maybe this is happening. This could be your Chi kind of trying to guide you in one or the other direction. And so we are following the story from this Chi, and what this does, it does multiple things. So first of all, it roots this story into the history of Nigeria, as I've also referred to, but it also roots it into this culture a lot more. So it roots it in the culture of Nigeria, but a lot in the culture of its past. So if we are looking at the current day time frame that we are looking at in this story, almost all of these characters are kind of not really abandoned the old faiths, but they've kind of been pushed out of this faith as the white man has become very important, and as the white man's religion, Christianity, has taken over. So most of these characters are Christians. They invoke Jesus Christ, and one of these characters gets redeemed through his belief in Jesus Christ at some point in the story. But they are all, it's not because they have abandoned their old faiths that this is not part of their culture, is not part of their story. So the Chi very much roots the story in their culture, in their history, and very much showcases how Igbo cosmology and folk tales from Nigerian tradition have an impact on what is happening in his life, or have something meaningful to say about what is happening in Chinonzo's life. Secondly, it also allows for a more reflective style, because he can draw upon these years and years and ages of experience, so he can root the choices that Chinonzo is making in the history of its previous host. And I have heard that that is somewhat of a something that people dislike about the book, is that he will often say like, I have seen this many times. And I did note the use of I have seen this many times at some point. It never got like annoying to me, but I did definitely notice that it was in there a couple of times. Another thing that it does is it creates a sort of distance between Chinonzo and you. So I don't necessarily see this as a bad thing. I think it could have been interesting indeed to have a closer relationship with Chinonzo yourself. You're seeing the Chinonzo and his actions and feelings through the actions and feelings of the Chi. But it could have been interesting to have a direct link with Chinonzo. It would have probably made the feelings more raw, more powerful. In a sense, then I feel like the use of the Chi actually protects you from some of the impact of the brutality or the despair that this character is feeling. On the other hand, I feel like I felt the despair of the Chi so much, you know. I felt the Chi wanting the best for his character, for his host, and having almost no control over what was going to happen, and feeling how the despair of the Chi realizing where this story could go, the potential dangers that were in there, and then just watching that whole thing unfold. it does also mean that you are getting warnings. The Chi is telling the story in hindsight. He is telling the story to the creator of all, and he is telling the story in order to defend his host, because from the very beginning we know that his host has done a horrible thing, and that the Chi is there at the sort of, let's call it the godly court, to defend his host, to let the gods know, yes, he might have been responsible for this horrible thing that is happening, but it was an accident, he didn't mean to. That kind of leads me into something else. I've seen some negative reviews of this book that refer to the fact that this book seems to be condoning certain actions that Chinonso is taking, that is kind of defending why he took them. And I don't think that that is the case. I don't think that the author is defending Chinonso's actions. I think it is easy to think so because we are getting the narrative, because we are following the narrative force of the Chi, and the Chi is mounting a defense for his host. But I think it's important to realize that the Chi is not the author, you know, the narrator is not the author, and I think what the author is doing here is using a unreliable narrator. He is using the Chi, and even though the Chi has had many hosts, has had many different experiences, the Chi is also so tied to the host that he will always defend him, you know. It's like they are one. At some point it also says it, like the Chi and his host, they sort of melt into one entity. And so he is not just defending Chinonso, he is defending himself. He's also defending himself in the sense that he is the guardian spirit. He is supposed to guide his host. So if his host does horrible things in their life, this could be a reflection on his skills as a guardian spirit. So I don't think that just because the Chi is mounting a defense for Chinonso, that this whole story should be seen as a defense of what Chinonso is doing. I personally feel like the author really distanced himself from making judgments in this book. He purposely decided not to give an author's voice to this story, not to pass judgments on this story, to just give you the raw facts, the story as it is, and then give you this unreliable narrator in order for you to make up your own mind, for you to see the story unfold, see the danger that is happening there, have that pointed out by the Chi to you, and then arrive at your own conclusions. I personally think that you're guided to condemn these actions, but of course readers will have different experiences with books all the time, and so I won't say that there's people who feel like this book was condoning this type of behavior don't have a valid point to feel like they were driven in that direction. That is clearly the experience that they've had. But from my point of view, at no point did I have the experience of like feeling like, oh yeah, he did these horrible things, but yeah, he also went through horrible times. So what I think, so my experience with this book is just that the author is trying to show how it is possible that the naive and innocent and happy, simple boy that we meet at the beginning of this book ends up becoming the unhappy, desperate, angry, abusive person that he ends up being at the end of the book. So I thought it was a very powerful read. It's a very powerful character study in my opinion. I would go as far, but I haven't reread that book in a very long time, so don't take this literally. But it did kind of remind me of Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky, as in Crime and Punishment, we're very much looking in how the crime generates its own punishment through the psyche of our criminal. You know, our criminal becomes so paranoid, so desperate, so feels so much guilt over what he has done that he's kind of punishing himself more than that the system could ever punish him. And this book is kind of doing something similar, you know, it's very much looking into how the psyche of the human mind can become even more of a punishment than the horrible things that he goes through in this book. On that note, also please note that this is very much not a happy book. This is very much looking at dark pages in a person's personal life, in a person's personal history. It is looking at instances in which anger result into violence, result into lashing out, result into a total change of a person's personality. Not just at the ending of this book, we see this throughout when his love for his chickens can sometimes lead him to do brutal stuff if his chickens or his love for his chickens is endangered. It is very much... where's my train of thoughts? So it's very much looking at these dark pages, these dark chapters. So if you have problems going into the darker stuff of life, definitely look up trigger warnings. There are definitely a lot of them. If you have read A Little Life by Hanya Hihare, I would say that this one feels very similar in places. In my case, in any case, I didn't have as much of a emotional response, and that has to do with that distance that we have because of the narrator being the chi, I think. But we do still have a very, you do still have a very emotive reaction to it, and you are very much invested in it, and it also feels the same way as A Little Life felt, where you're just waiting for the next bad thing to happen. So many of these characters that ended up being good characters that didn't do anything wrong in this book, I just started to kind of feel like they would do bad things in his life, because I could only see the spiraling further out of control, further into tragedy. But so it's very much has that same feeling of you knowing bad things are going to happen. It's pointed out to you as well. From time to time the chi will say, like, if I had known what this day would bring. So you know bad things are happening, bad things are coming your way, and so you have that same sort of feeling of anxiety about what your character is going to go through. You are rooting for your character the same way you do for what is his name again in A Little Life? Jude? Yeah. So you're rooting for him the same way you root for Jude. You want Jude to overcome his difficulties. You definitely want Chinonso to overcome his difficulties, to get hope back into his life. So there are definitely similarities in the way that I felt reading those two books, for example. And then finally, I would say that this book is often referred to as a retelling of the Odyssey, and I think it doesn't really do that justice, because I mean, I haven't read the Odyssey and I only vaguely remember the story, but I definitely don't think you need to see this as a retelling of the Odyssey, because you're just constantly going to make comparisons or going to be looking for the way that this plays with the Odyssey. The way that it plays with the Odyssey will be explained within this book. It will be very clear. So it is very much pointed out, and it's very much going to, like, I think if you go into it with a love for the Odyssey, a lot of knowledge of the Odyssey, you might get disappointed with what this book is doing. I mean, I don't know, I've just seen some reviews of people who went into this with the expectation of this being an Odyssey retelling, and were like, this is not an Odyssey retelling. So I would just say, don't go into it expecting a retelling of the Odyssey. It plays with a certain element of the Odyssey, but it subverts that element. It does the opposite. But that will be clear once you read the book. So high praise for this one so far. I guess my favorite read for 2020. There have been some other books that I've given 5-star reads that I've definitely loved, but none of them have stuck around with me the way that I'm expecting this one to stick with me. So yeah, hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know down below if you've read this book or are interested in reading this book, and we can chat about it in the comments. See you guys!